you, Nelson.
Good to see some of you again, and hopefully meet some new faces. This again could be fun because I don't use this tool particularly a lot, but I'm going to share my screen and read something and then talk about it a little bit more. And this first, and hopefully you can now see my screen. Can you see my poem? Yep, cool. So I want to read a poem called Keeping Up with the Joneses, and I'll talk about it a little bit more afterwards. We see the signs across generations, families where father buries son and grandmother buries daughter. William, husband of Anne, survived his wife and most offspring in those harder times, trying above all to make a better life in the cruel, hard, toxic city of fumes and thugs and mass industrialization, a nation with growing pains, chewing up the working man and spitting them out again. Broken, torn, the family, the only form of welfare. Now, in this quiet place of solitude, each beloved child, spouse or sibling is immortalized in stone and marble cladding, each showing how much they cared. Whilst following those social patterns, the traditional designs give way to the modern. All around we see the signs of the dead keeping up with the Joneses. Now, here's the clever thing. Can I go back to the camera view?
Nelson, just to let you know,
right.
it wasn't in presentation view, so you might have to choose a different screen next time.
I'll choose a different screen next time. Thank you. So why start with that poem? It's one that I wrote for the park I think in the second year. And this is now 2.5 years as an association with the park, and longer because, as I mentioned when we first met, I published a novel which involved the park. Very conveniently, because my dog in the book needed a walking place, and the park was great, and I bumped into the park on a Saturday when you had an open day, and the rest is history. But why that particular poem is the fact that, apart from being an author, a writer, and a lover of green spaces, is I love storytelling. And I think one of the things that we focus a lot on the green aspects of the park. And the other thing the park is, and when we go back to the Millennium or the project around the war graves, is that the park is this massive set of stories. And when you look, one of the things I wanted to do more, and I haven't done enough of at the moment, is take individual graves and look at the stories behind them. If you look at the Will Crooks poem I read last time, Will Crooks is a fabulous story about change and what happened to him through his life and what he did and gave back to the community. And I think there are lots of examples of that, and you'll see family histories on the gravestones, and you'll see patches of the names changing as well, as the area has gone through different forms of immigration through Eastern Europe, through actually Western Europe as well, through Germanic names and French names and Italian names, and then coming into more Slavic names. And I think there's a fascination there of stories to be told. And so the park for me is a place of stories. But going on to a couple of things now, I'm going to read a couple of poems about seasonality. And one of the things I think we're being robbed of, and I felt very, very envious of Ken then, is to see the season. I've missed a season in the park. And if you're wondering why I'm not there now and not walking out of my door, I live an hour away. I happen to work nearby, which is why I got tied up with the park in the first place. So I don't have the opportunity to get to the park. And so I've now missed a season, and it brings the fact that some of the stuff I've written about the park is around seasonality. So I'm going to read another couple of poems, one on the solstice and one on the circle of life. And hopefully I can do it in a way that will work better this time than last time. Sorry, this isn't the most professional demonstration of using Zoom. Let me share my screen now and see if that works better. This is called, is that better now? Cool.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, this is called Solstice. The pagan Merely inches below the surface, we harness those old ways of timekeeping, even more now as we reapproach nature, counting each equinox and solstice, noting the changes in the season, in harmony with the cycles. We plough, we sow, we reap, then snow. Full term, we run the loop again. The graves lament another year, older, colder. The green more dominant as the Victorian order subsides, with every twisted root that undermines a stone. This is no longer just the home of graves, but a living place, graced by abundance, above and below the soil. And as the longest day approaches, Mother Nature once more shows that she will win in the end. I love the idea that we are actually coming up to solstice. This is, it caught me out slightly that we'd moved so far into the year. The next poem is called Bookends. Oh, no, it's not. Sorry, it's called Circle of Life. I've used a picture of eggs on here, and what I should have done, because I did this a little bit late, is use some shots I've taken. I was talking to Michelle and Susanna before we started. My green spaces have been my local golf course, which was closed for 2 months, and I followed a pair of swans until they actually went through eggs, and then finally had 6 cygnets, which was lovely because it felt like a reconnection. And I'll come back to the bird theme later, but this is just called Circle of Life. With the softest crack it begins. Under the shell, new life beckons. Mother, tired and sore from sitting, senses movement beneath her down. The urge, the surge, maternal yearning rises up. She sings her song to inform the absent father of foraging to feed the family. Minutes pass, the carapace cracks. First beak, then neck, the world awaits. Once pulled apart, the mother sees still wet feathers waiting for the sun. To the nest returning home, father presents his prized fare to his new son, an heir for the air. A new king of the wing is born, but for now he waits to grow, as next in the nest another crack echoes. I won't get into the boring technicalities of writing poetry, but there are certain things in there that work for me. There are poetic tips and tricks that people use, and alliteration is one of my favorites, where you use the same sounding letter again, and also in triads. So three ofs are very comfortable, and it's a Greek rhetorical device using triads. But stopping sharing now. I've also got notes to follow. So how is the park helping us right now? Because Ken's in the park at the moment, and obviously people are using the green spaces. And I won't ask right now, but in the questions at the end, if anyone wants to make any comments, I mean, there are a lot of conversations going on right now about mental health and isolation. I see at least half the screens here are single people, as opposed to, and you may have a partner there, but you may not. The ones who are locked down with a partner are probably luckier. And I wrote a piece on LinkedIn and also through my work website, talking about introverts versus extroverts and how they differ in terms of their reaction to COVID and to lockdown. I have a feeling that extroverts are having a much harder time of it, because the expression that was given to me a few years ago is that if you go to a party, an introvert will go home tired because they have their energy stolen from them. And if an extrovert will go home completely engaged and full of life because they actually take energy from other people. So if you're in rooms now, you'll not be able to do that. The latest changes to Boris's guidelines have started allowing us to re-engage with each other on a personal level, which is a huge element. But I think the park allows us to have that green space and that engagement space. But there's 2 poems I want to read now, which talk about two different elements of what's going on in COVID. One is to do with mental health, which is something that I write about for work, and also, well, not for work, but through my work, but also through some wider organisations, through mental health health first aiders, but also back to the birds. So I'm going to share my screen again and see if I can get this right. The next poem, if I can make it work, it's called "We Were Always Here." And it worries me that people are getting nice and worried about mental health now, and then they'll go back to stop thinking about it afterwards. And I think we have to be aware that people have worries all the time, and it isn't just COVID that's doing it. So this poem is about the fact that mental health has been a problem for a long while. We were always here. Mindful of the times, we are surrounded by a sudden kindness, a harbinger, a halo, a corona, a blight in all your houses. The common man espouses more care than before. I applaud your sentiment. It is sensitive and sentient. I implore you to consider the one thing that is clear. We were always here. From loneliness to stress, through every mentioned syndrome, the mental pressure grew until many fled the system or gave up under loads that Atlas would find testing. In this modern world, the one thing I'm requesting is remember, we always mattered. The battered and the bruised, not a newly birthed affliction. Abuse, contempt, and cruelty led to torture and addiction. So not just for 1 week a year or when a crisis looms, remember gentleness. When normal life resumes, we will always be here. There will always be people that need our support. And hopefully when we come out of the far end of this, we'll remember that those people rely on us to reach out and ask the question, are you all right? And when we don't get an answer, we ask the question a second time. I mentioned birds, and I was talking to Michelle and Susanna before we started this. My mum is 85, and I dropped off groceries last night. I drove a 100-mile round trip to drop off groceries and look at her through a window, because I still don't think I want to go near her and be the one that gives her the plague. So what we've been doing is sharing bird photographs. So I've been going out and taking ornithology photographs and sharing them with her via Skype, so we can rekindle a love I used to have of ornithology when I was a child. So the next poem is called Born Again Ornithologist. No, it's not. We won't do that. Let's talk about Metamorphosis. I think I have a couple of problems with my deck. Never mind. We are in caterpillar season and in butterfly season, and I think the idea of this poem was to remember that we are going through changes at the moment, and the lockdown has some similarities with the process of creating a butterfly. This is called Metamorphosis. I was the caterpillar that first amorphous, growing without knowing, unaware of the world around me, unsure of the future, only acknowledging the now. But then I disappeared into my shroud, a carapace surround, locked in, locked out of the natural world, with a period to consider things, to develop and grow wings, both metaphorical and metaphysical, augmenting my captivity with the realization of release, a chance to find peace and reveal my true colors at last, to watch those fallen moments pass under the bridge of time, flowing on down the river of forgetfulness, mindful of the need to return to the wild, to dance like a child in those green spaces that bore me. I'm just conscious of the time and keeping to my track. I want to just ask questions about what themes people would like to see, and I don't say necessarily do it now, but I'd like to continue with this project with the graveyard, but I'd like to get more out of it, and I'd like you to get more out of it. So I'd like to understand, are there poems you'd like to hear? Are there subjects you'd like to touch upon? And so if you feel like sharing afterwards, anything you might like to do, we ran workshops in the community last year to write poetry. And if anybody would like to do any poetry, would like to meet up in the centre when we can, or even do something online, I think we could just explore our love affair of the place that we sort of have become very fondly attached to in different ways. You don't have to. You might want to simply share something that you love. I have a real passion for Thomas Hardy. I think the books that he wrote were great, but the poetry was far better. And not many people know that he serialized his novels to pay for the poetry, because, as people will tell you, I have to have a day job because poetry don't pay. Um, but it's actually fabulous for the soul. So would you like readings? Would you like workshops? Would you like bespoke poetry written to commemorate an occasion? It would be lovely to do it under the aegis of the park. And if you have a particular grave because you're associated with the area and you have a loved one in there and there's an anniversary coming up, is there something you'd like to have written that would help you with your commemoration? I'd also like to consider, because we've now got 2.5 years worth of poetry, we may well pull together a poetry pamphlet. No, I'm not asking for money, and I'm not asking for the park to produce this, but maybe we do something where we just create something as a memory of what we've done with the park and the project, because it would be great. I'm going to read. I'm going to stop talking now and read again, because you're probably saying shut up and talk about poetry rather than just talk about rubbish in general. So I read Metamorphosis. I'm going to. The other thing I like about the park is the architecture, and I've now been to 6 of the 7 magnificent 7 graveyards, and they all have something different. I think I like Tower Hamlets because it's the most wild. I don't mean livid, but it doesn't have a lot of the architecture that's in the other ones. But what's in there, if Millionaire's Row is beautiful, for instance. So I'm going to read, I think, 2 more poems. I'm going to share my screen, if I can get this right. This is called Written in the Stones, and again, it's about remembering the storytelling. Some say there is no history, just lies written in the hand of victory, graffiti scrawled upon a wall by the few that stood and did not fall. But I see the truth in passing of stars and in the perspicacious parade of protein strands, in the songs of birds prior to our arrival, ferns and lichens that carpeted our world before we started to make notes. All around in our sombre burial ground are to be found stories of love and joy, of marriages that lasted 60 years, of families that passed the baton from woman to girl, from man to boy. All those tales and more besides vie for attention as we pass by, awaiting discovery one more time. Who knew that cemeteries followed fashion? Materials, styles, the words that never rationed, show patterns from periods of time, like buildings with Edwardian or Victorian design. A cherub here, an angel there. Yes, I didn't correct that, Susanna. And references to old country not forgotten. I sit amongst the stones and listen to the stories unfold. I'm going to read one more poem to finish. And it's because of something that happened last night. And I was saying to Michelle and Susanna, I was given some names of plants and butterflies that were prevalent at the moment by Ken, and it was all a bit last minute because I've had a 60-hour working week and it was all a bit tight to get it written. So I sat down at 9 o'clock last night to write a final poem to include all these flowers. And as I did that, a colleague I used to work with sent a message on Facebook saying he's thinking about committing suicide right there and then. And so suddenly the poetry stopped being so important, and I started sending messages out to people going, have you got his phone number? Can you get in touch with him? And all is well. 2 hours later, I finally could calm down and get to sleep and all sorts of things like that. But I still wanted to produce the poem, and I think it was important for me that the poem reflected that moment when the ephemeralness of flowers and butterflies actually touched where human life was going. So I'm going to read the last one. It's called It's Only Natural. I was on the verge, teetering on the edge of composing, about to mark the pages with phrases of viper bluegloss and knapweed through imagery of the oxide daisy. But something stopped me, a message from infinity, from a soul I used to know, testing the water of the pool of despair, writing of his thoughts to end his pain, to refrain from carrying on. Those flowers are ephemeral. They have their short but glorious time. He is not. He means more, and he must persist. I insist he speaks to a friend or anyone who he can call. I message him my number. Now I lie here, staring at the ceiling, numb and unable to slumber. I want to spin yarns of baby grasshoppers that take flight with clouds of Lepidoptera, painting the sky with common blues and ringlets, whilst the commas punctuate my sentences. But all I can think of is a human being, not being entirely himself, and wishing to stop altogether. I gaze into forever, rise from my sheets, go to speak with the moon, hoping tomorrow will be just another day, and that maybe the gatekeepers and I shared a role tonight. And the positive side, of course, is that he's now back on social media and talking and feeling better about it. But it reiterates that we are all in unprecedented times, and we are all longing for, if we're not close enough to the park, to get back into our green spaces.